Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to the Psychology of Bilingualism and Multilingualism. I am Dr. Ark Verma from the Department of Cognitive Sciences at IIT Kanpur. This is the fourth week of the course, and now I will move on to understanding comprehension processes in bilinguals and multilinguals. Let us begin. Now, an interesting question in terms of comprehension that has been asked, irrespective of whether we are discussing about monolinguals or bilinguals, is this process of understanding meaning. Now, the thing is, you might be aware that a lot of words carry a single meaning, a lot of words carry more than a single meaning, and a lot of times when we are interpreting the meanings of a given word, it is in reference to the context in which the word has been used. So, for example, the word cat, as we know, refers to a particular animal, a feline, but the word catwalk actually refers to a particular kind of a walk which is basically exhibited by models on a ramp. Now, the thing is, depending upon where we are using a particular word, depending upon what context in which we are using on a particular word, meanings can be actually made out differently. Now, this has been a problem of consideration for not only linguists and psycholinguists, but also philosophers, and people have sort of weighed in differently on this thing. For example, people have really wondered whether meaning making is actually actually or in fact in some sense affected by the surrounding linguistic context or a global context for that matter, based on who you are talking to, what is the topic, where are you actually having that conversation, versus the more local linguistic context of a given statement. Now, initial research in psycholinguistics or cognitive science about this particular topic was led by the ideas of Jerry Fodor, who gave this very influential theory referred to as the modularity of mind theory. Now, according to Jerry Fodor, the central idea is that the mind is composed of mental modules, small little modules in the mind, which are basically information processing devices that perform basic cognitive functions on incoming information. These modules you can think of as very domain specific, centers of information processing that work within this overall structure of the mind and are basically attuned to handling very specific types of stimuli. These are informationally encapsulated in the sense that they only deal with that particular kind of information that they are attuned to treating, and are not affected by extra information from other modules and so on. Also, these modules are supposed to operate very fast and mandatorily, and there are some other factors like they have graceful degradation and so on and so forth. They have specific breakdown patterns and so on and so forth. Now, the idea of modules is sort of fascinating because it divides the brain into smaller functioning units which importantly do not interact with each other. So, for example, if you were to write a program of a library, and if I am sort of asking you to write a code to basically run a library where books will come in, books will go out, you will enter books that are being brought on by individuals, you will exit books that are being issued by individuals, there will be from time to time new inventory, etc., and so etc. and etc. But how will you write this code? Say, for example, if you want to write this code, what you will do is you will probably need a 5,000 or 10,000 line code. Again, forgive me because I'm not really a computer science person, but the idea is mostly programmers would try and do the way they would try and handle this problem is by basically writing functions or writing modules which are basically taking care of specific functions. Say, for example, you could write a function or a code for entering a new book in the inventory or issuing a book to a user, or for example, you can write a code for when a book is being returned by a user, how does it get entered again into the overall system of the library. Now, this is precisely what Jerry Fodor sort of, or this is something similar to what Jerry Fodor sort of thought about the mind, and he said that mind is basically doing so many things. There are so many interesting functions that we operate, and the smallest functions, the most specific functions, at least say for example, color perception or decisions with respect to language, word recognition for that matter, facial recognition for that matter, can be thought of as modules, where these modules are basically performing very specific tasks, very specific circumstances in an informationally encapsulated manner, basically saying that they do not need input of other kind to influence their processing, let's say of faces or of words. Now, if the mind were indeed composed of such modules as described by Fodor, researchers have actually wondered how the system of visual word recognition may be considered of as a module as well. The idea is that possibly in fluent readers, at least, visual word recognition basically is fast, is mandatory, and is dedicated to processing a specific kind of input. You might be fascinated to know that there are researchers have reported a particular area in the brain that only lights up when it is presented with letters and not with other kind of stimuli, that is referred to as the visual word form area. Now, if the visual word recognition system is indeed modular, then neither the linguistic context of a word, basically the sentential context, nor any extra linguistic information such as who you are talking to or where you are having this conversation would be able to affect how we make meanings out of the word. And this is an interesting conundrum because you will see, and there are a bunch of studies that actually show that meaning making does consider a lot of these issues. To basically study this better, or to basically study the understanding of meaning, researchers have actually tried to investigate this issue by studying how individuals resolve lexical ambiguities. What are lexical ambiguities? Lexical ambiguities basically have to do with understanding words that carry more than one meaning within a given language. For example, say you could have the word bank, which can refer to the bank of a river, or it could refer to the financial or monetary institution that we know as the bank. Or for example, the word bug can use to refer to an insect, a beetle, or anything like that, or also for example error in a program or something like that can be used to overhear conspicuously overhear conversations and so on. Now, lexically ambiguous words are referred to as intralexical homographs because they are words having the same spelling within a single language system that can lead to different types of meanings. Now, researchers have investigated the fact that whether a single meaning or all of the meanings concerned with this word or with these types of words get activated when the individuals are encountering these words. And there are different views posited about this, and there are a bunch of experiments that have presented evidence for and against this idea. For example, the exclusive access hypothesis suggests that only the meaning that is contextually appropriate in a given scenario will get activated and the other meanings will not get activated, basically suggesting that individuals have a very strict grip on what meaning a particular word is going to make given the linguistic or sentential context of the word. On the other hand, there is the exhaustive access hypothesis, which basically suggests that both meanings of the words will get activated at least momentarily and will affect how individuals react or respond to such a word. A very interesting demonstration of this was provided by Swining in his 1979 experiment, where he had participants read a particular excerpt of a text, where the text basically referred to something like the building was this text is about a very old official building, and there is a sentence where it is said, given that this is a government building, you can expect bugs, etc. there, bugs, other insects, and so on and so forth. Now the thing is, the word bug, as I said, it has two meanings. It has the meaning of an insect. It also has the meaning of a conspicuously concealed device, of a concealed device that can allow people to hear something. Now, given that government buildings deal with secrets and so on, it is probable, at least in a global context, that people might have bugged the building to get information out of it. They actually asked their participants to decide, to basically read on the text while they presented them with the lexical decision task with words which either align to one meaning like insect, ant, etc., and which aligned with the other meaning like spy, which would align with the word bug in the concealed hearing sense. And they actually found that at least for some time both of the meanings of the word bug were activated. So in that sense, the experiment actually provided some support for the exhaustive access hypothesis. What does this mean for us? It means basically that if a word has two meanings, or let's say more meanings, it might be in that sense be able to activate multiple semantic representations in the mind of an individual who knows the word. How will we basically spin this to bilingualism? How will we basically, how does this inform us? How does this inform us anything about bilingualism? Now, while lexically ambiguous words are certainly an interesting problem to solve in a monolingual context, in the bilingual context, the problem sort of metamorphosizes into something else. The problem basically converts into whether lexical activation of a given word is encapsulated within a single language context, or whether, say for example, if a word has meanings in both the languages, both the meanings across the two languages will get activated. There are examples. For example, if a word means two different things in bilinguals, for bilinguals in two languages, suppose the German word gift, in German the word gift means poison, whereas in English the word gift means present. For example, also the French word coin, which means corner in French and refers to money in English. Now, these words are referred to as interlexical homographs, and basically the property that they have is that they basically from the same spelling can refer to two different meanings across the two different languages. So, these category of stimuli have been sort of important for researchers to sort of look at and understand whether meaning activation happens across languages or meaning activation stays within the ambits of a given language. Another interesting class of stimuli that people have used for understanding lexical ambiguities in bilingualism has been the interlexical homophones. The interlexical homophones are words which have identical phonological form. They may have different spellings, but identical phonological forms and different meanings across the two languages. Now, before we move on to specific studies in the bilingual domain, we would like to point out two major differences between monolingual and bilingual research studies on lexical ambiguity. For one, the majority of monolingual studies have focused on presenting the critical words in a sentential context, motivated by the idea of checking whether lexical access of these words is affected by a linguistic context or not. On the other hand, bilingualism research has mainly focused on lexical access within a given language, and has since basically tried to present words in an isolated form. Another point of difference has been that while monolingual studies have mainly concerned with the process of resolving an ambiguous word's meaning, bilingual studies have mainly limited themselves to basically just accessing the word's form or lexical access. Let us look at some of these studies. Now, Bovilla and Granger were among the first to use the cross-language primed lexical decision task in English-French bilinguals to study the lexical access of interlexical homographs. The participants were presented with a set of stimulus spheres consisting of a French prime word and an English target word or non-word, wherein the prime and target were presented sequentially. So, the primes came first and the targets came second. In a priming paradigm, the primes are presented momentarily. They are almost unseen by the individuals, but they still have an effect on the target word based on the relationship between the target and the prime. Now, participants in this study were basically instructed to read each prime and then perform a lexical decision on the target that followed. Most of these primes were French words, however, some of them were actually French English interlexical homographs, such as coin, which I was mentioning earlier. Here, the question that the researchers were trying to answer was basically whether such interlexical homographs would facilitate the processing of the subsequent English targets such as money. Now, while the participants would have deciphered that the primes are French words, whether their English meaning will get primed or not is what we are testing here, because the word coin means corner in French, but it means money in English, and in that sense, if the English meanings are being primed, you would basically be able to deduce that both meanings of the word coin are being activated. Indeed, this was the case when the interval was between the prime and the targets was relatively short, that is around 150 milliseconds, but it was not really found when the difference between the prime and target was as long as 750 milliseconds. What does this tell us? It tells us that both meanings of the interlexical homograph was actually activated, and only at a later moment was the contextually inappropriate meaning deactivated. So at least in the initial stages of when we are reading a particular word, both or all of its meaning may become activated to differential degrees, but obviously with time, when you have the time to integrate the entire sentence context and the broader linguistic context, maybe people are able to switch off or deactivate the contextually inappropriate meanings. So, the findings are, but there was a bit of a thing with this study, that the findings of the current study could be called into question, because the authors could sense because both English and French words were present, and hence people could argue that both the lexicons were automatically activated, and hence may be able to sort of account for these kind of findings. You might remember that Grosjean gives the language mode theory, where he said that, if individuals are primed for both languages in the environment, they will sort of be ready or sort of keep their mental lexicons prepared for handling stimuli of either kind. However, when the situation is such that only one of the two languages of bilingual are being used and implied in the overall context, they would be more ready for just one of the two lexicons, and the other lexicon would be slightly, it will take some time to warm up to that. Now, therefore, for a stronger test of language selective word recognition, language non-selective word recognition, it would probably be best if words from one language are exclusively presented, and it was checked whether also under these circumstances the non-target language lexical candidates are getting activated. Further, given the fact that the most salient characteristic of an interlexical homograph is the fact that it has different meanings in the bilingual two languages, this has been an interesting aspect of some of the future studies. Some of the researchers have not looked explicitly for evidence of whether both of the homographs meanings are actually getting activated. Mainly what researchers have actually looked for in bilingual studies is basically evidence for co-activation in the non-target lexicon without making the a priori assumption that meaning activation would underlie such evidence. So as I said, bilingual studies have mainly focused on whether lexical access of both types can be performed or not, irrespective of the fact whether meanings have been accessed in much detail across the two languages. Now, a study that investigated with a similar stance was conducted by Kirchhoffs and colleagues, which employed the semantic priming methodology with primes and targets in the same language, measuring both behavioral and ERP responses to the critical stimuli. In this study, responses to unprimed interlexical homographs were compared with responses to unprimed unilingual control word. Basically, people were performing this lexical decision task where they were presented with interlexical homographs and control words which had meanings in only one of the two languages. Now, the homographs and control words would match on a bunch of variables that have been shown to affect people's word processing times, such as word frequency and so on. Importantly, the only difference between the two types of words was that the interlexical homograph, as the definition goes, occurred in participants both the languages, whereas the unilingual controls occurred in only one of the two languages. Given this setup, any difference in responses to homographs and controls would certainly result from the fact that the interlexical homograph is bivalent, has two meanings, whereas the unilingual control is has just only one meaning. So, across this one and some of the other studies, it was actually found that depending upon the exact demands of the task, which experiment and what kind of participants and stimuli are being used, the composition of the stimulus set, so on, the responses to interlexical homographs were either shorter or longer than the control words. This effect has been referred to as the homograph effect in the literature. Now, the magnitude of the homograph effect has been shown to depend upon a range of variables. For instance, the homograph effect was found to be large when the homograph was more frequent in the participants' non-target language than in the target language, and the participants were performing the language specific version of the task. Now, if language non-selectivity were to be observed under any circumstances, these frequency effects you would expect, because in this sense you are saying that if the participants are sensitive to the frequency of a given word in a non-target language, it means that they have activated the word in the non-target language as well. So, these findings are actually in line with the assumption or with the prediction that when you're reading words that exist in both languages, both of their meanings which across the two languages are getting activated. To a certain extent, people are accessing the word representations across the two languages. On similar lines, bilingual studies have also investigated what are called interlexical homophone effects. Words that have the similar sound, not necessarily the same spelling, but similar sound and different meanings across the two languages. For instance, Dijkstra and colleagues sought to separate the contributions of cross-language orthographical and phonological overlap. Their participants were Dutch English bilinguals who were visually presented with letter strings. Interestingly, in the study, orthographic overlap actually was found to produce a facilitating effect, whereas phonological overlap was found to produce an inhibitory effect. Similar results were also obtained by Docter and Klein in an English Afrikaans study, although in a different study by Hay and Jared, French English bilinguals were shown to respond faster to interlexical homophones than to control stimuli in an English lexical decision task. Now, although the effects of the orthographic and phonological overlap occasionally produce opposite types of effects, both these effects at least provide evidence of one thing, that the language that for these words there is a certain degree of language non-selective processing happening. People are being able to activate both orthographical and phonological forms of bivalent words which basically exist in both languages. Now, given the slightly conflicting results across a range of studies, people have sort of assumed that at least under some circumstances, bilingual word recognition may operate in a language selective manner. Let's look at some evidence some evidence towards this idea. Now, in a study by Jared and Joux, there is some support for this idea. The authors of the studies tested French English and English French bilinguals in a word naming task wherein they visually presented English words which were to be read aloud. In one condition, English target words were preceded by a block of French words to be read aloud in French, and in another condition, they were not. Now, the French English bilinguals with the target language English as their vehicle L2 named the English homograph targets much more slowly than the non-homographic control words in both the conditions, providing at least some support for the fact that language non-selective processing is happening in both conditions. On the contrary, English French bilinguals for whom the target language English was the dominant language named the English homographs more slowly than the control words when they were preceded by a French naming block only and not when they were not preceded by the French naming block. You can see here that for French English bilinguals, they are obviously going to be slower in naming English, which is not their dominant language. But for the English French bilinguals, they are only naming the English words slowly when they have just read a block of French words. Okay, what does this actually tell us? These results were taken to imply that under certain conditions, language selective processing indeed occurs. More specifically, these results suggest that while the stronger language can be immune to influence from the weaker L2, such as English was immune to influence from French in this case, although it does not happen the other way around. So, French does not sort of get influenced by English so much. Moreover, the pattern of results for the English French participants also demonstrates the fact that when the activation of non-target language is boosted somehow by people just naming in French prior to naming in English, the dominant language may also get slightly influenced by the activation in the non-target language. We have just sort of primed that particular language mode. Converging evidence suggests that language selective processing may certainly occur under some circumstances, as is obtained in the study by Haig and Jared, who demonstrated language non-selective processing when French English bilinguals processed interlexical homophones in an English lexical listening task, but not when English French lexical participants English French individuals served as participants. So, you can basically see that there is some evidence for co-activation across the two languages. However, there is also some evidence to the fact that there is some kind of language selective processing also going on here. Now, another very interesting caveat of the study by Jared and Joux was that these authors obtained an inhibitory effect of the interlexical homographs in contrast to the facilitatory effects obtained by Dijkstra and colleagues. It would seem therefore that task specific factors such as task demands, basically what is the participant required to do in a given task situation, actually has a very important say in determining the direction of the homograph effect, whether it will be larger, smaller, or it will manifest itself or it will not. For instance, inhibition is mainly observed in the naming task due to the task requirements. You have to prepare and name. However, when we are just talking about lexical access during word recognition, inhibition may not play a part because you are still sort of being able to access it. That's all that I wanted to share with you in this lecture. I will talk to you about some more things in the following lecture. Thank you.